Now would just like to welcome our presenters today who will be discussing writing AI and rhetorical thinking across the discipline. So Shevaun Watson and David Kocik. Just as a kind of a brief introduction, Shevaun Watson is Associate Professor of English and Director of Composition here at UW-Milwaukee. She has her doctorate from Miami University of Ohio, which I always get a little confused when I see Miami University, then I see Ohio, and I'm like, wait, it's a little colder than all right. She's published numerous pieces. The most recent being Beginning Again, Monument, Protests, and Rhetorics of African American Memory work. David Kocik is a Media, Cinema, and Digital Studies PhD student in the Department of English. And he received his master's in media studies here at UW-Milwaukee and has published multiple articles of his own. And he served as a 2023 UWM teaching fellow, where he performed just basic wizardry in organizing the new TA orientation. He was just amazing. I was such a great time working with him. So welcome, both of you. Thank you for being here.
All right, welcome. So I'm Shevaun Watson, this is David Kocik, and we'll just get going here today. So David, I think, is going to lead us off, but to start, here's, if you want to follow along, here's the URL.
Yeah, we're
linking out to some things, and we'll have kind of a few discussions and activities. It's not critical if you don't want to, but if you want to, we're going to be referencing an article, and so that's linked out to as well. So bit.ly/AI and rhetoric. Okay, great. All right. So Dave's going to start us off.
Yeah, so some background about this presentation. So Shevaun and I have been working on developing some curriculum regarding AI in our writing program here at the university. And we have thought about integrating it into our courses, but we've also kind of come up with some issues that we've kind of run into as we're trying to think about how to integrate it into our classes. And here we're specifically thinking about generative AI like ChatGPT or Claude AI, for example, right? And so when talking about integrating in the classroom, we found some issues that it's iterative rather than inventive, right? It's predictive technology rather than something that maybe like presents novel new ideas in certain ways, which is generally kind of what we're looking for in our writing classes. And specifically, it lacks the specificity required for writing at college level with things like analysis, synthesis, comparison, contrast, etc. It performs kind of a good general, like broad ideas in those situations, but we found that students, when they're using it with these kinds of tasks in mind, it really struggles to do that kind of stuff. We've run into as well that it can understand genre structures, like it can kind of understand what's in a lab report, for example, but it has difficulty in attuning those structures for specific audiences and purposes, right? So a lab report, just say in physics for a physics, professor is going to look different than one that's being published in an academic journal, for example, right? So it can understand the general format, but it has a problem attuning those genre expectations. And it also has difficulty replicating tone, word choice that we think of when it comes to things that we call specific rhetorical situations, which Shevaun will get to now.
Yeah. Okay, so what we want to do, so that was sort of a setup of what some of the issues with AI, what AI can't do. And sort of the punchline here is that AI doesn't do rhetoric very well. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about rhetoric, what it is, and tell you how you can kind of work with those concepts. But importantly, perhaps even more importantly, is I want you to know that students learn rhetoric in English 101 and 102. So this is actually a concrete skill set that you can build on. If you want to. So it's not only helpful to you if you want to make some of your activities or discussions or work with AI or some of your writing assignments more rhetorically attuned. This is something that your students get very intensively in English 101 and 102. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about that, okay? So rhetoric is the foundation of our writing courses here at UWM. So 100 and 101 are essentially the same course. It's not worth going into the details here. And 102. The vast majority of our students take both courses, and we talk about rhetoric in both of those courses quite intensively. So just in a really kind of basic way, there's a lot of definitions and a lot of poor definitions and a lot of confusing definitions of rhetoric, but in a really basic way, we can understand it. And what we teach students to do in first year writing is both to study the effective communication of other people. Why are their texts working? And we lay some language and some theory on that so they can understand how to study other people's effective communication, writing and otherwise. But then it also, the point of that is for them to put that into practice, put those concepts into practice. So we can understand this is the definition that we give to students in first year writing. Again, 101 and 102, we layer on a more sophisticated and complex kind of theoretical discussion of definition of rhetoric. But just to begin, we talk with students that rhetoric is purpose-driven, audience-oriented, and context-sensitive communication. And those are things that AI can do, but can't do with a lot of nuance. And so that's why we really lean into that. We use the term rhetorical situations, and so that might just be helpful for you. We're referencing it in our presentation, and it might just be a really basic term or concept for you to know and to use if you want to as well. But rhetorical situations are the really complex context within which communication takes place. So we might call these all the mitigating factors of a communication situation. So this is a communication situation, and me as presenter, there are things that are mitigating what I can and cannot say, what I can and cannot do. Likewise, you're sitting in a particular way. Those are mitigating factors that control or shape our communication. And so this is a rhetorical situation. So we move throughout hundreds of rhetorical situations every day and throughout our lives. And what we want to teach students in 101 and 102 is what we call rhetorical dexterity, is to move in a very savvy and facile and effective way across rhetorical situations. So to move from class to class to class, from work to school, from school to a profession, what have you. So what they're understanding is not how to write this exact thing for this teacher, but how do I understand the communication situation that I'm being asked to respond to? How can I use that to then know what is available to me? What are the choices I can and cannot make? So that's what we try to teach, is this ability of rhetorical dexterity. So really, we help students understand that rhetoric is about understanding one's choices within a writing or speaking or digital context. And they're just moving within very specific communication situations and also the variability of them. So the other thing that's nice about rhetoric is that it's broadly applicable. So, I mean, I came out of a literature program and we teach literature, and it's very important and a vibrant area of English studies still. But those literary terms are relatively limited in terms of their application. Rhetoric is broadly applicable to all communication situations. So it's really helpful for students, and it's helpful for you to know about. And to the point of our presentation, AI is not particularly good at it because it's so specific to context. So AI can do the general, but not really be very rhetorically savvy. So we want to talk about some of the things that we do in 101 and show you how we work with an AI generated process and move into a more rhetorically savvy one here. So that's what we've got going here. Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to transition to kind of an activity that we invite you to participate in. So we're going to, if you want to click on it, that'd be great. So in 101 and 102, we have different themes. And we wanted to show you kind of an example of an article that we would read and guide through our students and work with writing assignments with in 101. This fantastic article by freshwater science professor Dan Egan about, it was part of a 4-part series about.
It's actually a very long article. It's not just, a page.
So we're not expecting you to read through it. We're just linking it here if you want to look at it. But this is an example of a kind of reading we would do with our students, where we get them to think about the rhetorical choices that our author's making, right? Why are they including images in certain ways? Why are they, chunking out the article in certain formats and that kind of stuff, right? And so usually the first thing we do whenever we're reading an article is we guide students through the process of a summary. and specifically an academic summary. And we have like kind of specific guidelines for what that is. And we're going to use the example of the summary activity for you all to kind of show how the AI context in which like summaries are generated can perform some positive things, but also fails to address specific rhetorical situations and contexts as we define them in our class. So if you are on the PowerPoint, on the next slide, we're going to have a summary that we just want you, a sample summary that I generated through Claude AI. And what we want you to do is to just read through this summary that was developed and ask yourself a couple of questions. We'll have a discussion after a couple of minutes when we give you time. But this is an AI generated summary through Claude AI. I asked it specifically, can you please generate an academic summary of this article, Dangerous Straits? And what we want you to think about is, what does this AI generated summary do well, right? So when you think of a summary, what is this doing that like kind of aligns with your idea of an academic summary? And then what parts could be improved, what specific sections or overall structure, or whatever you see could be improved, and how would you adjust it? So we'll give you about couple minutes to just
chat with people too, for the folks who are here, if you want to chat with someone as well. So
yeah.
Just to kind of get some of our ideas going.
Yeah.
Which tool did you have generate this?
Claude.
Claude.
Yeah.
Yeah, the article was too long for chat.
Okay.
GPT.
So sorry, I don't know Claude. Who's that? Who runs that one?
Claude, it's a nonprofit called Claude AI. Their newest generator is called Claude Opus.
Okay.
It's like their paid version. And it's very deliberately meant to be kind of like ChatGPT analog, you know.
CLAUD.
UDE.
Yeah.
E. Okay.
Yeah.
Got an E at the end. Okay.
Yeah. I've also found in general that it's a little more sophisticated when it comes to academic writing.
Really interesting.
ChatGPT.
Yeah, this is really interesting. One of the main themes in 101 is about Lake Michigan, since it's here. So we read a lot about water in the lakes. And yeah, this is about these pipes that go through the Mackinac Straits. And wow, who knew how potentially problematic this is? He says at one point that Lake Michigan and Lake Huron used to be one lake. And it used to have a huge waterfall, and now there are actually two lakes. But because of that original connection, the strait between the two of them is really violent and just crazy and very unstable. Yeah, so this also gives you a sense that we're not reading like literature stuff. We're trying to expose students to a range of kinds of topics and readings. We'll read, we don't read, hardcore scientific articles, but we're trying to read across a range of genres and again, rhetorical situations. But any sort of thoughts? I know you haven't read the article, but just any thoughts about, this AI generated summary, what we like that it does or what we don't like. Any sort of thoughts, or folks online can chime in as well.
I'll be monitoring chat.
Okay,
Awesome.
thanks, Lynn. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like the first paragraph like drew me in and provided some useful background. And then the second and third paragraphs all of a sudden started throwing in some details that I was like, but wait, what's that?
Right.
So I feel like it wasn't very complete in those later paragraphs.
You kind of get the sense like it's drawing on some words and some details but you don't know. I mean, I wonder like what's Enbridge and
Right.
where did the Canadian thing come in? Yeah, so.
And then Michigan showed up in the third paragraph and I was like, oh, but where are we?
Right,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there's some detail, but you don't have that sense. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. What are you thinking?
So I got stuck in the first couple
Sure.
sentences because it was constructed in 1953, but it says 63-year-old pipeline. So then when I go to the article, it says 63-year-old pipes lay exposed, but that may not be the pipeline. So it's taking these dates kind of out of context and not, although the pipeline was constructed in 53, is older than 63-year-old, and the pipes are the issue. So that threw me off a lot right from the beginning. Like it misses the detail of the pipes versus the pipeline.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what do you think?
Mark Harris online was pointing out that the first paragraph does a good job of summarizing, where the second paragraph kind of is jumping around. And maybe you're, Sarah, you're kind of bringing this up too. Like you just kind of like, you don't know what's happening. It's kind of simulations could show a 700 area shoreline ruined, concern or raise about response. It's just kind of like, it doesn't give you segues between those ideas. It seems like,
We do ask students to generate, just for the sake of, a 250 word, so because it's hard to write short than long, especially in a summary. If we ask them to write long summaries, then they end up just regurgitating the entire thing.
Right.
So part of a 250 word summary is what are you going to filter out into the top? So that's a lot more challenging. Yeah, what were you thinking?
So my response may be just completely reflective of my own perspective, but I guess that's rhetorical, right? It starts out letting me know that this article examines a controversy.
Yeah.
And so my immediate questions are, who's involved in this controversy? Who are the parties? What are the stakes?
Yeah.
And that is completely buried
Mhm.
and essentially lost in
Yeah,
the summary.
it
And by
is.
the end, I'm starting to get a little bit of an idea.
Mhm.
But I feel like, oh, that's actually probably the heart of the article,
Mhm.
and it's not coming through in the summary.
Yeah.
Mhm. That's fair. Yeah. Yeah.
This is a super simple
Yeah, sure.
observation, but like when we teach summary writing, we ask that in the beginning, the first sentence include like the title of the text, place of publication, the author's name, the thesis, I guess, of the text, right? And that's missing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
so
go ahead and then.
I was going to add just one thing. I ran this through Copilot on Microsoft just while we were doing this as well, and theirs was significantly different as well.
Yeah.
So just like this is interesting, like what that produced versus what different AIs will produce.
Right, exactly.
So-
And that's actually part of what, you'll see we're doing here, but is that a summary isn't a summary isn't a summary. So a summary has a very specific rhetorical purpose. And if you try to leverage that, you can help students really, really work with information in different ways. And in fact, AI generators are going to generate different summaries as well. That's sort of the point. There's not one right way to do it. It depends on what the purpose of the summary is. Yeah, so
Yeah.
issues that we want to
So,
talk about.
yeah, these are some issues we noted. I just want to mention that all the feedback in the audience is also very similar to the feedback we give to our students
Yeah.
about their summary writing, right? That's very similar to, it's very similar to what students are kind of struggling with, right? It developmentally, right? The idea of taking details, but finding the broader message and the broader purpose is something we really work on students with. And ironically, it's the same issues that we noted with AI generated summaries. So, right, no context for the article, who wrote it and why, where was it published, why does that matter? It was part of a 4-part series, for example, why does that matter as part of its publication? And like a couple of people mentioned, it focuses solely on content, but we're not really sure what the overall purpose is. We're not really sure who they're writing for or what the writer's strategies are. What are they drawing on? What sources are they citing? That kind of stuff. And unclear where the information comes from, right? Simulations, so where does the simulation come from? Why does that matter, right? Concerns are raised. Whose concerns are being raised? So those are some issues we identified. I'm not going to read through this full thing. This is an example of what a revision of the summary might look like with including some of those details. We're going to zoom in on a couple of sentences that helped us.
So we'll see that this is an example where we might ask students, or we might in class, work with an AI generated summary, talk about it in relation to the content and the strategies of the article, and then have students revise into an academic. And then we talk about what do we mean by an academic summary? What does that need to do? What are the specific moves? So again, this isn't perfect. This isn't total, but they're only working with 250 words. So it's interesting to look at some of the changes. So
Yeah, so the idea of context in mind, right? Being more attuned to the rhetorical context. It sounds really simple, but students often struggle with it, and it's something that we as writers kind of naturally know, but students don't, is including the detailed information in the beginning, right? So instead of saying the article examines, we say, in the 2017 Milwaukee Journal Sentinel article, Dangerous Straits, Dan Egan, journalist and resident at UW-M Center for Water Policy, examines blah, 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 right? So also we're helping them practice the skills of like citation and that kind of stuff too, with these summaries, as well as source of information, right, revision, including where this information is coming from and what sources the person is drawing on. And that's super important for research and for academic writing. And that's something we would guide our students through, right? So when it says simulations show a spill, who is running those simulations? What are they finding? Okay. And then we also are incorporating author stance throughout. If you notice in the summary, it just says the article says this, the article says this. We're really trying to push students to think about the author and the person doing the communication, right, rather than the text itself. So why is that person, or what is that person doing, rather than what is the article doing? Right, that's a
we really
shift.
try to focus on the author, right?
Yeah. And then the purpose of the article, right? So for example, we revised the final sentence. And the final sentence of that original summary just said like, oh yeah, he talks about the controversy, or he talks about, you know, people are divided on the issue. But really, right, even though he doesn't come right out and say, we should worry more about the environment and this is a huge issue, right? We can tell because of how he's writing and the word choices that he uses that he's providing detailed information to advocate for greater attention to be paid to these issues. So he's not just saying like, oh yeah, there's both sides, right? He's using a specific sources for specific purposes.
Okay, so then in terms of trying to work with what may I call more rhetorically oriented or more rhetorically attuned sort of activities or assignments that could be done in a wide range of classes, here are some ideas, and then we'll look at some examples. So one is, of course, we're just all need to move away from generic writing assignments because they're just too easy to drop into AI. But in terms of then what to do instead, creating more meaningful rhetorical context for your students to do the work in. So the more specific that context can be, the more that you layer on, you know, for the specific audience within the specific time frame, you know, within, you know, the more that you can put some constraints, and that those are rhetorical constraints that give them, you know, I have to work within this situation, and that means I can do these things and I can't do these other things, can be very helpful. To not only move away from my AI, but also to leverage their rhetorical skills. So there's just a variety of ways that you can also just build in rhetorical thinking and rhetorically oriented tasks pretty simply into activities and assignments. So you can ask students to consider the writer's context and the writer's strategies within that context. So, you know, so the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, okay, what do we know about the readership? What are we assuming about that readership? Why publish this in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel and not UWM's Center for Water Policy newsletter? Or maybe it was published there. Is the same information maybe published across a couple of different kinds of publications? And how is that information different? What do we see as the author Egan doing to speak to that audience and to work appropriately and effectively within long form journalism within our local newspaper? You can also ask students to brainstorm. It's not like the choices that Dan Egan makes are the only ones that could be made in that situation, and they're not always the best one. So what else could you do? What else is possible in that situation? What are the effects of the strategies that are being made of those choices? Could other ones be made? Could those be more effective? Could those possibly be better? We also talk with students a lot about genre, so we can think of this as a newspaper article. It's longer, so it's sort of moving into longer form journalism. So you can talk with students about genre. They learn a lot about genre in English 101 and 102, and genre has a certain set of expectations, and we describe genres as having both what are affordances and constraints, meaning that genres allow affordances, allows writers to do certain things within that form, and it also, all genres have constraints, things that just cannot be done, word length, word choice, you know, whatever it is, citations, all kinds of things. So if you can really talk about the genres that you're having students read or the genres that you're having students work within, that can really help them understand that there is not one cookie cutter way, you know, to write. That's what AI does, but instead humans write across really rich and variable rhetorical situations. It's also very helpful. This is like a really easy think, pair, share, 2-minute exit ticket activity, something. Just have students think about themselves as rhetors, as writers, as people, that are making choices as well. So, when you turned in this report, not just what do you think you did well, but what choices were you making? Why did you do that? Why is that? Why do you think that's an appropriate or an effective thing to do within the situation that I laid out for you? So building in that reflection so that they can sort of flex those rhetorical dexterity muscles that they begin to build in 101 and 102. So here's some assignment examples from 101 when we're reading Dangerous Straits. And so one assignment is what you saw at the beginning, to use an AI tool to generate a 250-word summary and then to revise it for more rhetorical information. We would work with students on that, submit both, have the students highlight their revisions, but also include a writer's memo discussing their changes and also maybe some opinions or reflection on the effectiveness of Egan's rhetorical strategies that they begin to identify. So again, you can use AI, but then you can really show what its limitations are, but also the more that they work with the content of the article in revising AI's summary to have more rhetorical information can really be helpful for them comprehending the article from the inside out. David, do you want to talk about the second one?
Yeah, and we also have in 101, we've done this in the past before. The whole ChatGPT thing became huge, right? But it also works now. So writing 2 different summaries of the article for 2 different audiences and having them specifically think about what choices would I make when talking about this in a different rhetorical situation. So we have them, imagine 2 groups who might be interested in the issues that it raises, and then writing summaries that kind of motivate the groups to read the article, or maybe like try to show the important points of the article to that group. So students work through and brainstorm ideas about what does this group care about? What does this group know? What do they need to know? What do they already advocate for? And maybe how can we adjust their thinking, or how can we kind of scratch that itch in their brain about what they're already advocating for? What information do they need? What kind of writing will be most appealing to them? What kind of word choice should I use? What kind of format should I use? And so then they submit both those summaries along with a writer's memo explaining their choices. And this is getting them to really think about themselves as people who write and already write for a bunch of different people, a bunch of different audiences, and we're getting them to think about it a little bit more deliberately. Right. Classic example we use in 101 is like write an academic summary and then write a summary like you're talking to your mom about what you did in school this week.
Mhm.
Right. And that might seem really easy, but they have to be really thoughtful about the choices.
Actually, a lot harder than you would think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Students always gravitate towards the academic summary.
Yeah,
And then the
it's
extra one there.
easier.
Yeah.
Sarah, what do you think?
So I was curious, I know that you can have AI generate a summary and then you can tweak it by giving additional prompts to the
Yeah,
summary.
we're going to talk about prompt
Okay.
engineering. Yep. So
So I
that's
was just curious
yeah.
if that was part of these assignments in terms of, I think there still needs to be the human
Oh,
intervention,
definitely.
but.
yeah, no, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, we'll talk about
We
prompt
were just
engineering.
talking about, initially putting in a really basic prompt, but leveraging the prompt is an important, leg of this. So this is, these are some details from one student's writer's memo who wrote a summary of this article. And so this, she talked about wanting to write a summary of Egan's article for people interested in freshwater sciences. She grew up on the lakes and is interested in, in the Great Lakes and is considering a freshwater science major. And so could she gear her summary to that, to that group? And if so, how? So again, looking at other kind of similarly minded students. So she identified her purpose of her summary. So not the purpose of the article, but her purpose of the summary was to really, for these fellow students, to underscore the importance of the Great Lakes and to kind of stoke some interest among her peers in environmental issues facing the lakes. She thought a lot about language. So she said she wanted to be credible, but inviting. She wanted it to be really readable and approachable. And then the context was that, this article is 7 years old, 2017, but the issues that it discusses are still relevant. So to help people understand that these issues, are still very much with us. So here's the student summary. So what we see here is that it's not that this is necessarily a better summary or more accurate or has detail, but the student is engaged in foregrounding and backgrounding certain content from the article and thinking about what information does this very specific audience need and why. So how do I want to think about how to summarize this article for a very different purpose that would be more sort of outside of school? So it's not to get to the most perfect, the most accurate summary. We might focus on that more with the academic summaries, what information to include, but this other aspect to it invites the students to work more creatively, if you will, with the content of the article and to make some choices about what to include and what not to include. So in terms of, some more rhetorical thinking, different summaries for different audiences, so provides a very different context. So again, we saw the AI generated one just says that it's examining a controversy. This student included some of that specific, 2017, but here the academic summary didn't include, but she included the important point that this is part of a 4-part, series called Oil and Water. And that really is about how these things are going to run right through Wisconsin. They already are, and they probably will continue. So this is a huge issue for Wisconsin and Lake Michigan specifically. So really trying to highlight how important it is for freshwater science majors or folks here in Wisconsin to care about this issue. And then says that, this is then identifies that this is the second installment in the series and what it focuses on.
I love the word expose there, right? That's a really like great word choice to focus in on as a writer, right? Like in an academic summary, you probably wouldn't say expose, but here it makes a lot of sense, right?
So then the purpose of, highlighting a different purpose. So again, the AI said, just shows how the debate can pit economic interests against the environmental groups. This student wanted to highlight that the purpose, she felt like the purpose of Egan's article was really to make clear and to sort of make urgent that Lake Michigan is really lying at the crossroads of current issues, but also future. We've got a lot of future things coming at us in terms of what is going to be across Wisconsin and across the Great Lakes in terms of oil transportation. And then she wanted to make the argument, if you will, that Egan was really trying to convey that we all have some responsibility in learning about these issues, that he wasn't just making a strident argument that this pipeline has to be stopped. That's not what he's doing. She's interpreting it as saying, we all have some responsibility to understand the seriousness of this issue and to be involved in the decision-making, because this is a vital resource that affects everyone.
And that directly addresses the audience of potential freshwater science majors, right? It invites them in to engage in that conversation.
Yeah. So we can talk about prompt engineering, but any other points, David, or anyone else about, again, this isn't necessarily a more accurate, but it's a much more rhetorically attuned summary. Yeah, Lane, what do you think?
There's a question online about just kind of the logistics of this. So how did you feed the article into Claude?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So we had to put the article in Claude.
so you
because-
copied and pasted the text and so
Correct.
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And then we work with that AI generated summary in class. And we
Okay.
do what we did here. So talk about what does it do? Well, we've already sort of preloaded this by talking about summaries and why summaries are helpful to readers and writers.
Yeah.
Okay. So then here's the article. Our class is about Lake Michigan. We've already been doing some reading this semester about water and water issues. Now we have the Dan Egan issue or article. Let's put it into Claude. Okay. And then we'll use the AI generated summary and talk like we did. What does it do well in terms of what we know about what summaries need to do? What do readers need from them? What is the genre expectations of these? And then what is it not doing well? And they're then taking notes and preparing to revise that summary themselves. So then the second piece is them Dave, do you want to pick that up to?
Yeah.
Right, and.
The revision, and there's a number of different ways we go about it, right? We work in small groups where they have conversations about it and discuss it and kind of brainstorm ideas together, but then also like assignments where they go in and actually revise them and show, like Shevaun had mentioned, right? Where they have like a little writer's memo and they say, here's what I adjusted and why. And here's how it's kind of aligning more with what we expect of an academic summary.
So we either have students write their own revised academic summary and submit that. We also do these activities in classes where we jigsaw puzzle a new summary together.
Yeah.
So you three are working on this part of generating, a new part of the summary. You're working on the first part, you've got 100 words to convey X, Y, and Z. This other group is going to jigsaw the other part. And the pieces is then to work together and then talk together about the changes that everyone made together. So everyone can write their own revised summary, but it's also very helpful to work in class to jigsaw that out and have partners or groups working on just specific parts, and then a revision is created. Sorry, Brooke, I kept talking over.
Oh, no, I just thinking about this one and how it's different than the AI generated one. This one does such a nice job focusing on like the authorial action,
Right.
really digging into that. And that really changes how you interpret and what you get from the summary, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. So that's really getting at a lot of what we want to do with this activity is that you really to exactly what you said, different kinds of information, and you kind of see the article in a new light when it's written for in a different way for a different audience. Were you thinking of anything in particular?
Just looking at where it says, like kind of in the middle, Egan seeks to raise awareness down, right there, down one more.
Oh, yeah.
Just that's an example of, using the author's name, but then like, what's his purpose, right? And
Yes.
that's a nice example of that.
And you can see that the student still took this part from the academic summary that we generated, so the specificity about where the information came from, but wanted to say something different about what Egan's purpose was, and really felt like Egan was trying to raise awareness. That's also tied to the student's purpose in doing this, which is to really raise awareness and interest among students.
And at the end, he also presents divergent views, right? And that again brings kind of that his purpose, right, is to brings his purpose of writing the article into
more clear, a lot more focus on Egan than the content of the controversy. So that goes to your point, Sarah, in the back. Is the purpose of the article to know the specifics of the controversy, and why would that be the purpose of that? Is a legitimate purpose, and why is the purpose of another kind of summary to really dig into what Egan is trying to do, the complexities of an audience that is large, politically diverse, and maybe you don't want to come out swinging with a really strident argument. You really want to try to bring people in. Sarah, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, I'm so glad that Brooke pointed out we need the context, and then it was also on your slides because 2017 makes the dates add up.
Yeah.
Like I got so like this does not make any sense. So that context is so important for understanding the information. So
yeah. It really is. And what's not in here is he references more recent debates over pipelines, the Dakota pipeline and the Keystone pipeline, which he says are actually less dangerous than the one that's in the Mackinac Straits, which is really interesting. Yeah.
I just want to note how fascinating it is that the AI generated summary, one of the strongest characteristics of it, at least that one that you showed us, is that it completely elides authorial agency.
Right. Yes.
And this one draws it out.
Yeah.
And I mean, that it would be the AI generator that like the summary created by AI has no apparent authorial purpose.
This is
Right.
a great.
Distracting.
Exactly.
Yeah. This is a great segue.
That's sort of where we want the students to go. Right, it doesn't have an authorial, agent behind it or purpose, right? And so that's why it creates the summary that it does. And that's just is helpful for students to understand the kind of tool it is and then how their writing can and needs to be different because they do have purposes. And what we want to bring out is to surface that, to work with it. Yeah, to leverage it. That's really helpful.
This is a great segue into the prompt engineering
Yeah,
stuff.
any other comments, Lane, from chat or anything else? Or
Those were.
okay, so
Great, so exactly, right, the authorial action. So with prompt engineering, we also work with students in terms of prompt engineering, right? Trying to get more specific with what they're actually asking these programs to do. And as people who use AI, we can kind of attune AI programs to be more specific and to maybe attune to that rhetorical situation a little more, but there's still some issues with it. So for example, with the authorial action, I put in the issues that we found. There was a slide, where we talked about the AI generated summary, and one of the issues was like, where are the sources coming from, and where is what's the actual source, what's the name of it, et cetera, et cetera. I put it into Claude AI, and it was able to incorporate a couple of those things. So for example, it was able to incorporate things like those author stems, right? Like Egan argues or Egan notes, for example, right? So it was able to adjust to that expectation that I had when I deliberately wrote it in there, right? But that's not the first thing that's coming out. And so it was able to adjust a little bit to some of the expectations that I have of academic summaries, but still it really struggled anyways with specifically the tone and the word choice for specific audiences, right? So I wrote focus more on author content or author purpose, and really the only thing it did was add these author stems, but the conclusion was still the same, right? Of he presents both sides, there's a diversity of viewpoints, right? So it still had a little trouble with really directly articulating what his argument was because he doesn't specifically state his argument in the essay, right? Although we know through reading through it, although he does present both sides, it's really about paying attention to the environmental aspect of it, right? It also struggled with discipline specificity and expectations. So this is something for you as instructors especially, right? You have your own ways of defining key terms, key concepts. You have your own expectations for how you want students to write in your classrooms for specific pedagogical reasons. And that is really hard for AI to replicate just in general, right? Those expectations, partially because some of them are unstated, right? They're just things we kind of know, and other ways because again, it knows genres, but it's not able to really articulate genre within the rhetorical situations that we're writing in. Right? So again, lab report, for example, right? It can say, here's what's all in a lab report, but it has trouble articulating within specific expectations. And then adjusting to writing for specific context, just in general, right? If I wrote in, write this for a audience of freshwater sciences majors, I did that. And the word choice was more general. It was like, hey, this is a really interesting article about this, this, and this, right? And that might work in some ways, but for a 250 word summary, that's not going to work. Right, so it again has trouble kind of adjusting to those rhetorical contexts. So even though we work students through prompt engineering, we still aren't only relying on prompt engineering because it's still not really achieving the goals of what we want students to do with our assignments and the skills we want our students to develop.
Sarah, did you want to follow up then? Because you were talking about prompts and prompt engineering, or not to put you on the spot, but I just wanted to loop back.
I was curious in the assignment. So if you put the first summary up, did you play with it with the students, or did you have students do some of that? That was what I was curious about.
Absolutely. So talking about a really generic prompt, and then how can you work with the prompt to get different kinds of information?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then evaluating that as well. So in terms of just some final takeaways and final discussion in our last few minutes, just building in, rhetorical thinking into your courses and assignments to the extent that you can. So AI isn't particularly good at generating rhetorical nuance because rhetorical nuance is so context specific. So if you can be context specific, that's a really good way to work with and against AI. Also, just again, to reiterate, students learn how to think and write rhetorically in 101 and 102. That's what we do in both classes very deeply. So how can you build on those skills in your classes? So you should be able to use the word rhetoric and maybe not get universal, acclaim and applause and enthusiasm, but you should get some head nods. I mean, yeah, we really do dig into it, do a lot of fun things with it. So you could just revise a writing assignment or an activity to just include some more rhetorical information, purpose, audience, context, strategies, genre. You can leverage your prompts to highlight more rhetorical features and compare those, work with those, revise those. And then again, encourage students' reflection of their own rhetorical thinking, their own rhetorical work in terms of what context they're working within and their own strategies.
And those are things that can be really easily integrated into an actual writing assignment itself. We call them writer's memos, the reflective piece. So that's like another term that your students might be familiar with that you can add to some of your writing assignments. And these are also things you could do like within a classroom activity, right? Getting them to read through, say they had an assignment, due the night before, you can have them read through the assignment to another partner and then talk about the rhetorical choices they made. And then, so that way maybe they're not submitting it, but they're still talking about it and thinking through it. Right.
And it's not just more work for you to grade. A writer's memo is really for them to do, for them to think about. It can be, yes, no, I did it, I didn't do it. Or as David is suggesting, it could just be talked about or done in class and it doesn't have to be graded, but just the kind of going through it is helpful. But they are interesting they can be interesting to read. Other kind of thoughts or questions? Discussion items. Yeah.
Online, Mark Harris was asking, there's a couple different points here.
Sure.
Very timely discussion of both rhetoric and AI. I'm wondering about your thoughts on how AI may actually help with revision in face of its limitations, such as grammar or usage. The background is that my current course has several short papers with specific but different writing goals: summary, comparison, evaluation, etc. I've detected some short pieces that may be AI, and I'm assuming Mark, and I'm speaking to Mark in the ether here, but that you're talking about some of the student submissions here.
Correct.
Some of the pieces, there we see.
We hear you.
But it failed through this very well. So the AI generated responses that students may be turning in. So there's few materials on topics. He's wondering what explicitly some editing functions might help some students with this. And if Mark, if you want to develop further, please feel free.
Well, I would just say that the topical area, there's very little available for AI to mine. So when they try to get a argument or information, it's kind of a disaster for them. And I told them that. But I'm wondering, they still have problems presenting they get the information down, but they're not necessarily good at getting it into a smooth argument. Let's put it that way. If there's anything that could help them improve their style, I guess.
AI or not?
I mean, I do what I can writing with them, but I'm just wondering if there's any role there that might be appropriate.
For AI?
Yeah, this was something we noticed in the AI generated article, right? Was again like kind of just pointing out the facts, but having no transition or no kind of reorganization. Depending on the assignment, there's a couple of different ways you can approach it. There's a couple of ways in 101 that we approach it. So there are for their longer writing assignments, I'm not sure how long this assignment is, but for longer writing assignments, we have them work specifically on things like, this seems really rote, but things like transition paragraphs, right? Or transition sentences for paragraphs, I should say, right? We have them work on integrating a quote with their own thoughts and their own ideas and how to introduce a quote with their own thoughts. So it's not just like, here's a quote and then here's the next sentence, right? So we do some more kind of the nuts and bolts of that in 101, 102. And I usually find that a lot of students struggle with that idea. They're really good at identifying the facts, but struggle with those transition sentences. So that's something we just really focus on in 101 or 102. And then in terms, we also do things, and you might have heard of like a reverse outline, and that sometimes helps students as well, where they have the piece of writing they already did, and you have some feedback for like, this is where I see, this is really good, right? These facts are really good, but I'm not seeing, the kind of connective tissue that I'm looking for. We sometimes have students do a reverse outline where they take the writing they've already done and kind of bring it out to an outline and say like, okay, here's what's actually in the piece of writing I've done, right? So here's the overall structure of my piece of writing, and here's what's kind of missing within that outline. And that's another way to get them to think about, what am I not including that we would expect for someone to include within this genre or this context. So it's kind of two strategies that we've done. I don't know if you want to give anything else.
I mean, there's a lot there because, it's just, we have the luxury in 101 and 102 spending a lot of time just on the writing.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have the time, but that's what students need to have that more sort of stylistic sophistication and the sort of argumentative sophistication, is that just takes time and revision. The students need time to really digest the complexity of the issues and the articles and the information and research that they're dealing with. And they need time to be able to write that in more sophisticated ways, whether it's summary, evaluation, or argument. So we can't, that just takes time, and we have a difficult time, speeding that up. Our best students, of course, can do that more quickly. But, the average students will just literally need more time. That's where the Writing Center can be really helpful. Also, my advice, just as a writing teacher, is to help students either collectively, once you see, what's going on in your class and you have some ideas, or just individually is even better, to just focus on one or two things. Don't tell them to do 100 things to make their paper better. Just tell them 2 or 3 things. Even though you see 15 huge problems, just tell them 2 and tell them about the 2 most important ones. So if you're talking about argument flow, get some examples in front of there, take 5 minutes in class to really show them how can you rewrite this and make this better. And that's what everyone is going to work on for the next revision. So the more that you can just have students focus on 1 or 2 things, either collectively as a class or individually, is really helpful. Even though you see a lot going on, focus is the best thing for students.
I will say too, just study after study after study shows that student writing quality, however you want to define it, goes down when they are introduced to new concepts, new things that they're working through in their brain, right? Their brain literally cannot process it all at once, right? So that's just another thing to think through as well, is how familiar are students with these concepts they're writing about? And maybe we can review some of those concepts, review that as well. That can also help with their writing, right? If they have a solid understanding of the concepts they're writing about as well.
I tell my new graduate student teaching assistants that this happens in graduate student writing all the time. The quality of their writing degrades substantially because they are dealing with new concepts at a very deep level, and they struggle to write cogently about them. It takes years for them to be able to do that.
That's why you revise your dissertation chapter so many times.
Some of those seminar papers are real stinkers, yeah.
So I love this presentation, and I just wanted to make explicit how you're including high impact strategies, quality elements. So 2 that really come to mind are the periodic structured opportunities to reflect and integrate. Those integrative memos are just so important.
Oh, good.
And then the other one is opportunities to discover relevance of learning through real world applications.
Ooh.
So these types of assignments are the types of assignments that show that it leads to student success. So I just thank you so much for sharing and modeling it so beautifully.
Well, thanks for highlighting those connections. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Mark, I just wanted to do that. Mark, did you have something you wanted to add?
Oh, there, sorry, we went a little bit off.
It was very interesting. I think I've kind of developed some of these strategies in microcosm. It's nice to hear them. And over the years, I spend more of my course time helping them develop their papers than when I started,
Yeah.
by a significant amount.
Time well spent.
It really is.
Last question. Thank you, Mark. And then last question from Joanne online. Is there a particular AI tool that would be good for public speaking, like helping them do this? Just thinking of stakeholder roles where students have to explore perspective and act in that role.
That's interesting. We've mostly focused on writing, but this is something that we should be looking into as well.
Public speaking?
I don't know what public speaking is doing in terms of AI, so I can talk to, our coordinator has changed a couple times
Yeah.
over the last couple years with
That's a really good
sabbaticals,
question.
but that would be really interesting. I know that ChatGPT, you can say, pretend you're Winston Churchill and it will give a perspective, right? So I imagine it would be very helpful for thinking about audience analysis and that.
That would be interesting in our new assignment. We're actually, integrating something in next year's 101, and maybe we could find and use some AI tools that are good or bad at
Yeah.
that.
I think in general, right, because a lot of public speaking is very genre specific, very structured in specific ways. So most AI tools can at the very least help students with understanding kind of the structure of a public speech, right? Whatever that kind of speech is. So maybe if they don't help them draft it, it can help them with the structure of it. And that's something that would be really helpful for students.